Welcome. I am Patrice Valentine from ProFusion Web Solutions. Today's topic is a question actually that we probably get the most. Most people that we work with already have an existing website and they come to us because something isn't working for them. They're not getting leads from the website. They are hearing that, people are filled out their contact form and they're not receiving them. Something is causing them to wonder, gosh, do I need a new website now? Or can I just, kind of change some pictures and refresh my website a little bit? We often get these phone calls when a competitor has updated their website, which is now causing the business owner that maybe we're working with to say, hey, I saw that my competitor updated their website. It might be time for me to do something similar. So we do get this question a lot. It's probably our number one asked question. Um, Depending on who you ask, if you need to completely rebuild your website or just do a refresh, you're going to get wildly different answers because I would say every web developer, a true developer, has their own very particular way that they want to do things. So today we're going to look at this more from a business owner marketing point of view with some technical aspects, just because we can't ignore some of those. But the goal is that if you're thinking, do I need a new website or can I just refresh a little bit to make my site function better, look better, answer more questions on AEO? Today we should be able to answer those questions for you on this phone call or webinar. We're going to look at today basically why websites age faster than you think. You'll see some people are like, I just got my website done 2 years ago, so why do I have to redo it or why am I having to update it again? So we'll talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about the three quick question foundation check that we have that's going to quickly kind of walk you through what you need to be looking for to make this decision. We're going to look at some warning signs that maybe will allow you to take a look and see that maybe patching your website or refreshing it is just simply throwing good money after bad. We will look at some costs and not just our costs. I did some research ahead of time and pulled some costs from some of our competitors, from some folks that I found who had published prices across on the East Coast. So we just pulled in some costs so you can get a general idea of what a refresh or a rebuild might um, might cost you. And sorry, I have a printer warning that just came up on my screen because now is a great time to update my Epson software agreement. So see if I can get rid of that. There we go. All right. So for the next 20 minutes, we're going to go through all of these things. And at the end, again, we'll leave you with three things that you should be able to check on your own website that if you are wondering if it's time for a rebuild or a refresh, that will lead you to have a more clear picture of what you're looking at. Let's first start with some numbers that may help kind of explain why this decision even maybe sneaks up on people when they have a website. The first one is 75% of consumers judge a company's credibility by its website design. That is from a very well-known Stanford Web Credibility Research study, and it's held up across multiple years. So this is a number that is stuck. Three-quarters of your prospects who are hitting your website are deciding whether or not you are a legitimate business based on how your website looks and functions. So that immediate 75% are taking a look at your website and going, is this legitimate? Is this someone who can solve my problems? Is this someone who's an expert in their area? The 75% are judging based on your website design. And that decision is made really quickly. Researchers clocked that first impression at 500ths of a second. That's faster than it takes me to blink. So nobody is reading your content that carefully before they make an impression. I don't want to say they're not reading it at all, but they are making an opinion. That opinion comes before they've even probably finished reading your opening headline on your website. So that initial design, how things load on your website, what they first see on that first content load and first load of images, that is a huge first impression for people coming to your site. The next stat we've got is 53% of mobile visitors leave if a page takes more than 3 seconds to load. That comes from Google's own research. So using Google Analytics and Google Search Console, they've determined that 53% will bounce if a website takes more than 3 seconds to load on mobile. And then the one stat that I think probably surprises people the most is across all industries, the average website gets replaced roughly every 2.5 years. I'm not saying that you need to rebuild your website every 2.5 years. I'm just saying that If your website is not well maintained, it might be every 2.5 years you're going to have to do this. A well maintained website could last 5, 6, 7 more years. It really kind of depends on how well you're maintaining your website, but that number, the 2.5 years, really tells us how fast things are moving around us. This was even before, the heavy adoption of AI. So 2.5 years prior to the heavy adoption of AI. What this means to you is there's a very big difference between my site still works and my site is working for me. And those are the two things that we need to look at. So yes, your site might be up and people can access it, but is it actually doing your business a service? Is it actually working for you? And that's what we're going to be looking at. Before we jump into our 3-point checklist there, let's get a couple of terms. Let's just get on the same page with a couple of terms because these words sometimes are used interchangeably. So just so you know what I mean when I say them, a refresh is just like repainting your house, adding lipstick onto, makeup onto a face. It is your platform, your page structure, your hosting, those all stay in place. What changes is what the people see. So actually kind of the front end interface, the design, pictures, maybe some copy, maybe your call to action changes. You might be updating some basic search engine optimization, but the main foundation of the website remains as is. A rebuild is going to be more of a complete tear down, start over. That's maybe a new platform or content management system. And I say that with a caveat because maybe you're moving from, maybe you have a WordPress website. We do this a lot. Will take a client who has a WordPress website that has not been maintained and maybe is on WordPress, 5.6, which was stopped receiving support updates 2 years ago. So you might be moving from WordPress to a new WordPress install, and we would still consider that a new platform change because your existing platform doesn't work. It's not being updated anymore. It might be riddled with security vulnerabilities. So we'd be moving from a platform to a platform, and that might be the same. It might both be WordPress, but it could be an update because simply the application has changed. It could also be a completely new CMS, which is a content management system. You might be moving from Wix to WordPress, Squarespace to WordPress. We're having a lot of GoDaddy websites that are done with their AI platform that we're rebuilding right now. So it could be a complete move from one platform to another. It could be new code, a new functionality being added. If you're adding e-commerce, anything like that might trigger a rebuild, which is that tear down and start clean. That doesn't mean that you need to take down your website and have a period of time where you do not have a website. A teardown can happen where you keep your existing website up and your new website is simply being built on what we would call a temporary URL. So the new website is getting built out. We're being able to show you kind of the progress. We're showing you what it looks like, showing you the changes we're making. And then once we say, hey, we're ready to go, and you say, yep, this looks great, we test it all out. Once it goes live, then we tear down your existing website. So you don't have to have a period of time where you don't have a website. We can build a new website while the old website is still up. And that's true for all web developers. I should say most, I guess I haven't checked with all of them, but that's a standard process for most web developers. So what that means for us is the right question to ask is not really how bad does my website look, because a website can look pretty bad and still be a perfect candidate for a refresh because the bones are good. It might be on a perfectly good install of WordPress with plugins that function perfectly. So the bones are still good, and it might just look kind of janky. Then we can just go in and we can do a refresh on that. But if it's a rebuild, what you're asking is, are the bones still good? Is it technically sound? So that's the question we're really asking and answering with our 3-question foundation check. One question is about the platform itself, one question is about performance, and then one is going to be about fit, making sure that the website actually still matches the business that you're currently running. I don't know about you, but our business has changed radically since we started this business back in 2004, 2003. So if we had still had up our first website that we had from 2003, 23 years ago, it would be so completely, the messaging is wrong, the service offerings are wrong. So, as our business changes, the website needs to change as well. So If you answer these questions today, that is going to help you make the decision on whether or not you need a new website or a simple refresh. So let's take a look at each question. The first one is your foundation, meaning what your website is built on, still supported? First is your platform. Is it still receiving security updates? That's going to be the biggest question. Your content management system, your theme, your plugins, if any of those have been abandoned or no longer maintained, that means they are no longer receiving patches. So as using WordPress as our example, again, WordPress is the main engine that drives your website. But if you need a specific photo gallery, we had a plugin for that. If you need e-commerce, we had a plugin for that. So if those plugins are no longer maintained because they're created by third parties, that can create a vulnerability in your website and it becomes harder and harder to patch. So what we see is in these examples is we get a lot of people who come to us with a website who was not updated. Their main core application has not been updated because if they ran an update, it would break X, Y, and Z. So if you're finding that you're running updates and it's breaking things, that is a sure signal that it might be time to do a rebuild. But those security updates are incredibly important because obviously we don't want any vulnerabilities in our websites. The second one is, can you make simple edits yourself? And I put this in here, but I realize not everyone wants to, but it sure is nice to have that option, right? So if you want to change the hours of your business, can you go into your website and change it from, 8 to 5 to 8 to 4? If you want to add a picture, can you go in and update those pictures? We understand that maybe you don't want to do that, but do you have the ability to? Do you have a content management system that is accessible should you decide to go in and make those changes? That's going to be number two as far as the foundation goes. And then third, we talked a little bit about this in the security update section, but does it break regularly or get hacked repeatedly? A site that keeps getting hacked or continues to break over and over again, that usually indicates there's something going on with the platform that is not being supported. This could be a couple of things. This could be that you don't pay for managed hosting. So your website is repeatedly going out of date. We made the decision many years ago now at this point to only offer managed hosting. There was a time where you could choose managed hosting or not managed hosting with us, where you just basically, we would just host it and you would run the updates yourself. And we found, shockingly, people don't update their own websites unless they are really forced to. So we were having customers who would have really out of date websites, which again is just a huge security hole. And it just doesn't keep up with modern browsers. So as Chrome updates, as Firefox updates, if your website is not on the current version of your platform, it can also then start to appear not correct. It won't load correctly in those browsers. So if your website is repeatedly breaking, it might just mean that you're not on managed hosting, and that might be a place where you want to go look. It could also be, as is the case with a couple of clients that have come to us, that your site is so old now and so far back on the application, like the version is so old that it can't be simply updated. So there have been a couple of times where we've attempted, there's a few case studies actually on our website about this, where we've tried to go in and update a website. We've made a copy of it. We've updated the website because it was on a super old version of WordPress, and just running those updates broke the website. So then we had to do a rebuild because we just couldn't salvage the foundation. So if your site is continually breaking or continually getting hacked, that is likely a bigger issue that you're going to need to look probably towards a rebuild. The breaking, hacking, and not receiving security updates, those are the real big ones. So if a no on any of those, that's going to be a pretty strong vote towards a rebuild. Question number two looks at website performance, and I put this specifically under two sections, and that was one, the mobile performance, and then the performance for accessibility. So first for mobile, if you take your cell phone right now and you pull up your website and you find you're having to pinch or zoom to read anything on your website, or if your buttons are too small, the links are too small in order to tap with your finger or thumb, then your website isn't truly mobile ready. If you find that you're having to scroll horizontally on your mobile phone to view everything that's on the page, that is not a true mobile optimized website. It could be a simple fix. Again, it could go back to Your theme needs to be updated, and your hosting just simply isn't updating your website theme or your core application. And that could be all you need to fix your mobile site. But quite often, if your mobile site is not functioning properly, that might also indicate that there is something structurally happening that would indicate a rebuild. You also want to take a look at how fast or how slow your website actually loads. We talked about this on the numbers slide a couple minutes ago, but if it's more than 3 seconds, you're going to lose 53% of your mobile visitors. So half your visitors are gone before they ever see any of the work you put into your website, your reviews, your offer. You might even be paying for traffic to come to your website. So if you paid for them to get there and then your site takes a long time to load, you're sending them away basically before they even have a chance to learn more about who you are, what you do. You might be the best fit for them, but they're not going to stick around. 53% of them are abandoning if your website takes more than 3 seconds to load. You're going to want to try and find out where the slowness lives. And this is a diagnostic part. So this is where it's going to get as technical as it can get. But if your site is slow because of really large photos or you have a video on your homepage, that's fixable in a refresh. If the slowness is because you have a really old theme that's bloated and has a bunch of extra code, or you have a pile of plugins that you simply don't need on your site anymore, it might be slow because your host is actually you're using maybe a bargain host, something that's super cheap, but you're getting poor service because of it. That might be a more structural issue that needs to be changed in a rebuild and not just in a refresh. And then I do want to talk about accessibility because this is the other thing that is causing me to potentially have to recommend a rebuild instead of a refresh. There is a plugin called Accessibility that can help, but in some cases it's just better to do a rebuild. When we talk about website accessibility, we're looking at ADA compliance and the WCAG guidelines. That's the technical name for it. And there's two reasons we really talk about. First, it's just what I consider being a decent business owner. And you want a website that works for people who are using screen readers or are navigating just by using their keyboard, or who just need more readable, contrasted text on the website. An accessible website just works better for everyone, including the mobile visitor that we were just talking about. So that's the first reason. And then the second reason is the wallet reason. So web accessibility lawsuits are actually climbing super fast, over 5,000 federal cases last year alone, which is up nearly 40%, plus tens of thousands of demand letters that never even make it to the news. And those letters are increasingly targeting small businesses with settlements running anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000. That's enough to pay for a rebuild. That $5,000 to $15,000, that's rebuild worth of money that you could be spending on actually making your website work versus having to pay to a law firm. If you don't know a business that has been sued or threatened with a lawsuit over accessibility, I personally think it's just a matter of time. I literally was at a wedding on Sunday and I was chatting with someone about what I do. And he said, "Hey, I just got sued. I just got a lawsuit because of my website accessibility." And I was like, "Yeah, we've been talking about this since about 2018. Not a lot of people took it seriously, but here we are now in our very litigious society. This is becoming lawsuit worthy." And again, a lot of those get settled out of court, but you're still having to pay the money that you probably would be paying for a rebuild. So better just to rebuild to save money on lawsuits. And also it's a decent thing to do. So that's our 2 points there. The most common complaints on accessibility is missing image descriptions, low contrast on text and background colors. Those are I'll say those are typically refresh worthy type fixes. But if your website has navigation that can't be navigated with a keyboard, or maybe your form data is, they're hard coded forms, feedback forms or contact forms on your website that don't have the ability to change the code on your forms, then you might be getting more into the rebuild. So if you are getting quotes currently on a refresh versus a rebuild, definitely ask about your website meeting accessibility standards. And again, that is WCAG standards. If the person you're working with can't answer this, then it might be time to look, obviously to us. But if you want, it might be just time to look elsewhere because that is a very big deal right now. Again, be decent, make your website accessible. Number three, does your website still match your business? Again, I gave the example of us from 2003. If we had the same website for the last 23 years, it would be laughable because nothing would be correct. I don't, maybe our phone number might be the only thing that has remained the same over the last 23 years and some of our staff. But so the way to look at this is, do you need new words on your pages or do you need new pages? Like, do you actually just fully need a complete set of new pages because everything has changed? If the fix is rewriting copy on your site, that's probably a refresh. If it's current photos, updating photos, making more clear offers, that's probably a refresh. If you need full new sections, service lines, new locations, a portfolio, a map change, that might be time where you can be looking at a rebuild. And that's simply from a monetary point of view. So then you're looking at, is it going to cost me more to rebuild this or just refresh what I already have? So that's what you'd be looking at there. Along the same lines, it's going to be this, are you speaking to a new buyer or the same buyer, the same audience or a new audience? If you're just sharpening your pitch a little bit, or making sure that you're addressing the right pain points because maybe those have changed as you've done business, then again, you're in refresh territory. But if you are looking at completely new audiences that have new pain points and you need new calls to action and you need, new calculators or tools, you might be looking at rebuild territory at that point. And then the last one is, do you just need new functions? WordPress actually makes this relatively easy to where this becomes a not black and white as far as rebuild or refresh goes, because if you need to add a shopping cart or you need to add a calendar for booking or you need to add a login or payments, whatever it is, your website is on a platform like WordPress and it's updated and managed and maintained, it's possible that you can add on those new functions with a plugin and not have to go into a complete rebuild. However, if you're on an old website that is not maintained, if you're on an older version of WordPress and you come to us and you say, hey, here's my website, I love it, I want to add on e-commerce. And we take a look at your website, we say it's on an old version of WordPress. We simply cannot bolt on e-commerce to this and expect it to function and remain secure. So then you might be looking at a rebuild. There's three questions. So those are the three kind of foundational questions that we looked at. And let's just quickly go through some warning signs that may tip you into rebuild versus the refresh. First is the site 5 or more years old? And we simply look at that because things have changed so much in this industry. Design standards, security requirements, what search engines or AI expects, they have all moved so far from where we were 5 years ago. And then if you look at 5 years of patches on top of patches, you could be in what's called technical debt. If you're using, again, a system like WordPress or Squarespace or Wix, it's likely that these updates have been managed for you. But if you have a more custom solution, that technical debt can really add up and cause problems if you're attempting to continue to evolve with the current standards. We talked about this a little bit, but if every time you fix something, you break something else, if you notice that one repair seems to cause, a couple of new problems, that is your code base, that is your application telling you that it might be time for a rebuild at that point. You don't want to pay to maintain the problem. I would rather you pay to solve it. You don't want to maintain it. If your upgrades are costing more than they should, and here's what I'm talking about. If a client comes to us and they're on an old version of WordPress and they say, we're absolutely not updating, we want to keep this site as is, we obviously want to help. We're going to make our recommendations based on our expertise, but we do obviously want to help with that. But in order to work on that website, we would have to take a full backup. We would have to make sure that, there's no malware on the website because there might be some vulnerabilities that have been introduced into that site. There was a lot of work that we would have to do before we could go in and make the maybe simple change that you're asking us to make because the website is outdated. And that adds up in your end, your final bill. So that that technical debt is actually costing you to the tune of 40 to 60% more on a project cost instead of just rebuilding and updating. So the cheaper option, keeping your website and updating it may actually not be cheaper in the long run. And then also looking at if you've already done a refresh on your existing platforms, if you had a WordPress site and you refreshed it and now you want to do another refresh, it might be time to look and see, does it make sense to rebuild completely? And that is strictly from a point of view of how much bloat does your existing website already have? When we log into a WordPress website and we see homepage, homepage old, homepage two, homepage three, there's copies upon copies upon copies of the homepage or service pages. It creates bloat on the website that might be causing slow loading. It might be causing, all kinds of issues with the website. And then it might be looking at time for a rebuild instead of a refresh on that as well. One way to score this is on our three things. So the fit, the platform, and the functions. If one of those, if one of those you're like, yeah, one of these things is off, then maybe you can refresh it. But if you're looking at all three of those things are off, then you're looking at potentially a rebuild. If we just really quickly wanted to run through these columns, a refresh can fix a dated look and feel, stale copies and photo, weak or missing calls to action, missing trust signals like reviews. We've talked a lot about those. And then some basic search engine optimization housekeeping. A refresh can usually can handle all of that. A refresh becomes unable, or a rebuild looks more attractive if your website is not mobile friendly or accessible, and we need to update that. If it's on an unsupported or dying platform, if it is slow because of the theme or because of multiple iterations of the website still live within that site, that might be a rebuild situation. If your navigation is confusing or if there's a structural problem, and if there is security holes, then you'd be looking all at a rebuild. Okay, let's take a look at some of the realistic numbers here. Again, these are not necessarily just all of our numbers, although our numbers are in line with this. These are numbers that I pulled off of other websites as well from web developers who do publish their prices. So this is pretty in line across the board of what you can expect to spend. So these come again from all over. We're in Washington State, but these numbers come. I grabbed a couple from the East Coast, one in Missouri, and I think one in Texas as well, and kind of just combined all of these. So a refresh is typically going to run you $1,500 to $3,000 more if a lot of pages need attention. Your timeline on this can be 2 to 4 weeks, could be faster, depending on how quickly you as a business owner are responding to the feedback here. One thing you want to look about is that it's going to give you potentially 1 to 3 more years with your current website. Okay, so it's not going to give you another 6 years, but it's going to buy you a little bit more time on your existing platform. A rebuild, if you're starting over, is typically going to be $3,000 to $10,000. That's for average small, medium-sized businesses. Can obviously go up from there if you have complex e-commerce sites or bigger websites. But a well-built site with upkeep is going to last you 4 to 6 years, and it's going to be in that price range there. If you do the per year math, that's when it's going to be probably the most meaningful. So if you're looking at a $2,200 refresh, that's going to last you an extra 2 years. It's going to extend the life of your existing website by 2 years. That's $1,100 per year. If a $7,500 rebuild is going to last you 5 years, you're looking at $1,500 a year, but you're getting a bit more time out of it. So that gap looks a little bit smaller than the invoice makes it look if you look at it on the per year pricing. That's a little bit of a mental shift on how you can look at the price of a refresh versus a rebuild. So budgeting for this is, I would take a look at your warning signs first. We just mentioned this, but if you have one sign, go ahead and just, take a look at the one sign, maybe get a second opinion. You might just need a refresh on that. But if 3 or more of those, if you have those three issues, then you're going to want to take a look at rebuilding and skipping on spending the money on a refresh. Because again, you don't want to put money into a website that is technically not sound. If cash is tight, consider phasing the project. You can rebuild the homepage and your key services pages and launch it with that, and then phase in the rest as you need to. My only caveat here is take into consideration search engine optimization. So you don't, if you have 100 pages and you're like, well, I really only need 20 of these, just make sure you have a solution in place to do 301 redirects and to make sure that you're not going to be missing out on a section of keywords that might be really meaningful for your business. We always want to encourage people to budget for the upkeep and maintenance of their website as well, because this is one thing that gets kind of glossed over. People look at the cost of the website build without considering the cost of keeping it up to date. Again, I feel like things are changing quickly, right? Like I think everyone in every industry at this point can say that. Every business owner I'm talking to is still, figuring out how AI is impacting their business and their customers. So with how quick things are moving, you have to budget for upkeep of your website. Maintenance plans, if you look at the really low end, if I'm looking at like GoDaddy's low end, where you won't ever talk to a real human about your problems, 40-ish dollars per month. I've seen maintenance plans all the way up to $300 per month, and there's a lot of them that are right there in the middle, including us. But you want to make sure that your website is maintained and managed with updates, security plugins, all of the things that are going to keep your website technically sound, because that is what is going to stretch a rebuild, instead of every 5 years, maybe it's going to be 6 or 7 years. So skipping your maintenance is how 5-year websites become 2-year websites. So skipping maintenance is how 5-year websites become 2-year websites. Plan for maintenance and management. And then plan the whole rebuild cycle. Healthy rhythm is to rebuild every 4 to 6 years. Obviously, if the website is working and everything is managed and technically sound and you've got a good partner in it, you don't need to do this. That's just simply what we're seeing is typically 4 to 6 years with a light refresh potentially in between. If it's planned, it can be budgeted, right? Panic projects tend to be overpriced. So if it's something that we can plan and we have an idea of where your business is going, I say all that knowing that I could have never predicted where our business was going a year ago because again, everything has changed quite quickly. So I say plan the cycle and I would love for everyone to plan the cycle. And I fully realize that that is not realistic for a lot of companies. But if you can plan the cycle, so plan the updates as needed. The most expensive website is the one you have to pay for twice. So if you don't have to, panic to rebuild because you've managed it, you've maintained it, that is going to be the less expensive website over time. Your homework for today, run the phone test. So load your website up on your phone, run it through Google Page Speed Insights. That's going to tell you how long it loads. It's going to tell you where the bloat is, if there is some. It's going to give you a lot of numbers, real numbers on how quickly things are loading. So that'll give you at least an actual number rather than like a feeling of how your website is doing on your phone. So go do that. It's Google Page Speed Insights. Number 2 is figure out what your platform is. So what your website platform is. You can email your developer or your host to figure out what version, if you're on WordPress or whatever system you're using, figure out what you're on. Is it still supported? If your developer can't answer that, or if it's like a vague answer, that's also an answer for you to determine that maybe they don't, not updated, not supported, things could be going wrong. And then count your warning signs. So again, if there's one of the things that is wrong, great. Maybe just get an opinion on how it would take to refresh it. If you have 2 or 3 of those, then start budgeting for that rebuild. All right. Let's see if we have any questions on rebuild versus refresh. I saw one come in right away. Dennis says, my developer disappeared and I don't know sorry, let me read this. My developer disappeared and I don't even know how to log into my own site. Ooh, I would love to say that that's really uncommon and I've never heard that before, but unfortunately that's more common than you'd think. Your domain is your web address. So there's going to be a login to your domain, to the registrar for that. You should have a login to your hosting account, and then you should have a login to your CMS, your content management system. So there's and those might all be the same login, by the way. So you might be able to log into GoDaddy, for example, and that's your registrar and your host, and also you can access your WordPress backend from there. But those are 3 things that you should have a login to. In fact, we have a technical checklist on our website that I'll send to the folks who are on this call. And if you want that checklist, just send an email to Patrice at profusionwebsolutions.com and I'll send you that checklist. Just put a subject of technical checklist or DNS checklist because we went through and we actually created a checklist for you to find out where your domain is registered, where it's hosted, um, where your email is hosted, if you're using an email marketing platform, what that tool is, and then what your website is built on. So you should have access to all of those. If your developer went away and you don't know how to access those, that our checklist will help you. First of all, it gives you little guidelines to figure out where all of that information resides. If you don't want to do the checklist, just send me an email and I'll try and help you figure out exactly where all of those are. But getting them back, having access to that is going to be step one. It's making sure you have access to your own domain. Sean says, will a rebuild hurt my Google rankings? If done correctly, it should not hurt your Google rankings. So when we rebuild a website, assuming it's on the same domain name, we'll set up proper redirects. So if your old page name was About Us and your new page name is Our Team, for example, we're going to redirect About Us to Our Team. So we're going to set up what's called a 301 redirect that changes from one page to the next. And it's going to keep your content on there. If your site is built well from a developer who understands AEO, SEO, Google Search Console, Google Analytics, and has an understanding of how all of these things work, then you should expect a well-executed rebuild to rank better. It might take a second for Google to say, oh, look at all these new pages or look at all this new content. I need to go re-index that. But if you're rebuilding, the thought is you're going to have better speed. The execution is going to be better. The structure is going to be more sound. So you should not expect to lose any rankings from a rebuild unless the main horror stories we hear is that someone has skipped redirects and Google is sending traffic to web pages that no longer exist. And that can cause a lot of issues. So we want to make sure that those redirects are in place. Let's see, is it Shara says, can I build my own website using a website builder or with AI? Yeah, I mean, the website builders exist. AI has certainly entered the chat as a viable tool for people to be able to build websites with. For new businesses who are, shoestring budget type, it might be a legitimate starting point with a massive caveat. And I, again, want to say just from real world, real business experience, and that we just got a phone call from a company here locally who had AI, GoDaddy's Arrow platform, I believe is what it was, with their AI assistant go in and build their website. But the website was built and launched in a way that it actually discouraged search engines from finding their content. And then instead of putting the homepage on their main domain name, they put the homepage on /home. So that if you went to the main domain name, you would get a 404 error. Only if you went to /home would you actually get to see the website. So there was a lot of technical errors that happened because the client is not a web developer. That's not their job. They're very good at what they do, but it's not web development. So I would say yes, of course you can give that a try, but you might run into the situation where there's technical issues where you want to have an experienced hand come in and help you make sure things are done correctly, because it does take time. Google is already going to be somewhat suspicious of a brand new domain name. So if you're starting out, you've got a brand new domain name. A new domain name is already going to be, it's not necessarily a red flag, but I would say it's like a yellow flag as far as indexing that content goes. You'll even see some DNS filters that will block your website unless you get like administrative approval. That's with secure. If you have a managed security company who that could be potentially blocking that. So you want to make sure you're starting out on the best foot possible. So making sure that you have a website that has the correct robots.txt file, that has an XML sitemap that has been properly submitted to Google Search Console. So those three things that I just rattled off are things that I know and we do every single day. But as a regular business owner who's focusing on growing their own business, you likely have no idea what any of those things mean, nor what to put in any of those things. So you're not paying necessarily for the web development, I mean, you would, but you're paying for that expertise to make sure that you're starting off with a properly developed site. So yes, you can do it yourself. Heavy caution. And I'm not just saying that because I own a web development company and a digital marketing agency, but because we obviously want to see you succeed. That's our whole goal, our whole mission. So, great questions on that. No other questions coming in right now. So I thank you very much for being here. Every session is archived on our ProFusion website. So if you go to ProFusion Web Solutions /services/webinar, you're going to see all of these webinars are there. You can register for future sessions or submit a question ahead of time by going to /webinar-series. And then next Wednesday, we've got a fun one. We're going to look at how you can spy on what your competitors are doing online. It's always nice to see what other people are doing. So join us next Wednesday. Thanks very much for being here, and we will talk to you soon.